All right, so at this point, I want to go through the mini lesson with you. If you would each download the sample that I attached to today's lesson. It is the lesson on making connections. So we're going to run through it section by section. I'm going to point out the different parts, and hopefully it will illustrate for you well enough so that you can have an easier time of writing your own mini lesson plans. So you'll notice in the very first box, I used the links to the TEKS to find the right TEK that went along with my strategy. So my teacher, me, wanted me to use the strategy of making connections. That's what she wanted me to teach. That's what I wanted to teach. So I found the third grade TEK that goes along with that strategy. I listed not only the part that identifies the grade, which is the one with that funny symbol at the beginning, but also the TEK itself, which is the number, comprehension skills, listening, speaking, ... etc. And the standard, letter E, make connections to personal experiences, ideas, and other texts and society. I listed my target strategy, making connections, and I described it. The description doesn't have to be super long, but it needs to show me, to demonstrate that you know what the strategy is. Going down to the text, I noted the Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, along with the author and the illustrator. The grade level equivalent is listed on ISBN as K through 4. The genre is realistic fiction, and I gave a one-sentence synopsis. Your synopsis can be 2-3 sentences. You probably don't need to go any more than that. The demands of the text. Now remember, there are two parts to this. The first part is the genre or organizational demands. So the demands of this genre is that students need to know that while the story is made up, because it's fiction, the actions described in the story are realistic. They could happen. So it's realistic fiction. That's the genre. Now the demands of the text, the background knowledge, remember our schema? Our background knowledge demands are that everybody has a bad day now and then. Running away from our problems doesn't help to solve them. That is background knowledge that is helpful for students to understand in order for them to comprehend this text. I listed 3 high-level thinking questions about the text. You'll notice that they're all open-ended with many right answers and no single wrong answer, that they involve critical thinking, and that anybody can answer them based on their own personal experience or thoughts. And I incorporated one of them towards the beginning of the lesson and 2 of them later on in the lesson. It does not matter where in your lesson you incorporate your higher level thinking questions as long as you get to them. Now we have the lesson objectives, and again there are 2. The first one is about the text itself. The textual objective: during the text-based discussion, the students will discuss that everyone has a bad day now and then, and that how we react to something bad happening can affect how the rest of the day goes. So, for example, between you and me and everybody watching this video, we know that the fact that Alexandra keeps on going on and on and on about the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day and how everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and he's doing nothing to turn it around, makes the day get worse and worse. But if at any point in the day he had changed his attitude or said, oh, well, that's okay, right? A, we wouldn't have a story. There's that. But B, it might have changed the rest of how the day went. So that's a point that I want to get across during the text-based discussion. Now, the strategy objective is that at the end of this mini lesson, the student will be ready to practice. Remember, SWBRTP stands for students will be ready to practice making connections. Text to self, text to text, text to world, text to media, text to peers. Okay, now we come to the lesson narrative. You will notice that I have scripted out the introduction and the teacher modeling and the student modeling and the beginning of the student modeling and guided practice. And that's how your lesson plans need to be as well. Those sections need to be scripted pretty much verbatim how you're going to say them. So during the introduction, I introduced the strategy of making connections. I showed my anchor chart, and I shared the secret to making connections is to think about a time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can read the lesson plan yourself. But make sure that you say the name of the strategy, what it is, and the secret to using it. You are also in this section going to introduce the text itself. So I said, to help us learn how to use this strategy, I want to introduce you to one of my very favorite books, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We get to the teacher modeling, and here I ask my first high-level thinking question. Who can tell us about a time when you had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, and what did you do about it? We're going to use that to get into the story. We begin to read, and you'll notice that after page 1, after page 4, and after page 7, I shared connections that I made personally to the text. So there's actually, I threw another one in there in the process of recording it that I didn't note here, and that was, that we all kind of know that things aren't any different in Australia, and that would be a text to world. But on your lesson plans, you're going to note the pages on which you're going to stop and share your metacognition. You're demonstrating your metacognition, sharing your thinking, teaching your kids how to think about the strategy. Then at the point where you're ready to engage the students, you've got your, I've said now that I've given you some examples of how to make connections, I'm going to keep reading, and if you have a connection to share, raise your hand to let me know. A little awkward doing this virtually. I hope you did really take the time to pause and share the connections that you made. And then as you continue reading and having the kids participate in whatever strategy that you're teaching. Okay. And then at the end of that section, I chose, that was where I wanted to ask my 2 remaining higher level thinking questions. Again, you don't have to put them exactly where I did. Just make sure you hit your higher level thinking questions in the course of your discussion. At that point, you're going to summarize and reflect. So who can remind us what the name of the strategy is and what's the secret to using it? Another question you might want to ask here is, can you think of another kind of text? Another that you would use, that you might use this strategy for. And then the follow-up is the activity that you did where I asked you to read your own independent reading text that you brought with you and fill out the chart that showed me how you made connections, to your, and I'm having a hard time getting to it, to your text, this one. Okay. So remember your gradual release of responsibility. Gradual release of responsibility, otherwise known as GRR. It's the I do. The teacher does everything. The teacher's reading, the teacher is sharing the metacognition. You're not bringing the kids into the conversation at this point, other than to talk about the text itself, but you are doing all the demonstrating of how to think about the strategy. That's the teacher modeling. The student modeling and guided practice is as you start to, we're in this middle section now where it's the we do, you're still reading, you're asking kids to raise their hand and share a connection when they come to one. And if they don't, then you're going to ask, if they don't automatically start raising their hands and sharing connections, and some classes will be better at that than others, or later in the year they'll be better at it than at the beginning of the year, then what you're going to do in the early part of that student modeling is you're going to say, gee, has anybody had an experience like this? Or can anybody connect this to something else they read or have seen or experienced? You're going to sort of pull them into it until they get to the point where they are then raising their hands when they have something that they can make a connection to or use your strategy. And that is the lesson plan. Don't forget your anchor chart. Very, very important. And please don't forget that I will look up on Pinterest to make sure that you're not just taking something from Pinterest. You may look to Pinterest for inspiration in terms of design, but in terms of content, it must be original. It must have the declarative information, which is the name of the strategy. It must have the instructional information, the instructive information, which is how to use the strategy and the secret to using the strategy. And it must have some examples. Okay, so if I were to be doing this in class, this, which is the sheet that I had you do independently, is what I would use as my examples, and I would do it as we read the story. So I would share, during the teacher modeling, I would share my examples of my connections, and then as students started sharing, I would either write it on a sticky note and put it in the right column, or I might just write it in the right column. And then I would give them a copy of this sheet to use independently with their own text for the I do. The I do means that the student is doing it all by themselves without teacher intervention. Of course, you're going around the room and checking in with them and making sure that they don't have questions, they understand, they're on task, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, that's the I do part of the lesson. They're doing it themselves. All right, so I think that's all. Again, if you have questions, let me know. Please do not forget to bring your Duffy, however you access it, to your field work tomorrow. And or on Wednesday, whenever you're viewing this, on Wednesday. Make sure that you ask your CT, and please, please, please do your best to impress upon them politely and respectfully that you do have a deadline coming up quickly on when your first mini lesson is due, and could they please give you either a TEK or a strategy to be working on with your mini lesson. Once you have that, if you need help connecting the TEK to a strategy or the strategy to a TEK, let me know and I'm happy to help you. Okay, shoot me an email, send me a text, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. Please do know that I will be out of pocket from about 4 o'clock on Tuesday until till Thursday morning, because I will be getting home late on Wednesday night, and will be in no shape at the end of the holiday to be responding to emails or texts. So if you don't hesitate to send me an email or text during that time, but please don't expect an answer back until sometime Thursday. Thanks so much. Bye.